All right, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us on today's webinar on ADA compliance. Just going to give it a couple of moments for a few more ones to join us. Just one moment here. All right, so now we'll get started. All right, thanks everyone for joining us on today's session. Welcome to the webinar. Today we'll be discussing what you should know about ADA compliance, why it's important, and how your website can be as compliant as humanly possible. So to start off with, my name's Dan Pendergast. If you're not familiar with Wineglass Marketing, we have been a very hardworking agency. We're a direct marketing agency that specializes in winery software for the wine industry and specializes in marketing for the wine industry. I myself have been involved for about 8 years in the industry itself, and have come up with creative solutions for wineries, websites, and their tasting rooms, and working as an expert in our integrated solutions for wineries. And today we'll be focusing on, among our widgets software provided and widget services provided, the ADA compliance services that are really important in our day and age. And if you have any questions, please feel free to submit them in the chat window, and we'll be happy to address them at a Q&A session at the end. Now, on today's schedule, we'll start out with what it really means to be ADA compliant. In this context, knowledge really will be powerful for you. Why it's important to be ADA compliant, why you should make sure that your website is ADA compliant, and how you can make sure that it remains compliant. So first of all, what does it mean to be ADA compliant? What is ADA compliance? Well, first off, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines are what businesses are using to be ADA compliant. Now, this is a list of guidelines. They're sometimes vague, and there's no actual laws set in place. Yet, there have been lawsuits and issues that have come from this. So when you make your website ADA compliant, this means that people who have auditory or visual disabilities can access your site with specialized technology, such as screen readers, Braille website reading devices, and they can understand the context of your website. Now that means that your website needs to work with these tools available and to allow these special devices to work properly. Now, according to the Americans with Disability Act, ADA, any business with more than 15 employees is subject to that ADA, that act. So if your business or winery has less than 15 total employees on the payroll, you don't really fall subject to those rules in place of a public accommodation. However, again, that's still very vague whether or not a website falls under that 15 employee boundary. Now, the whole point of ADA is to ensure equal access for those with disabilities. This means that your website could definitely fall subject to the ADA, whether or not you have 15 employees. And we've seen that with the lawsuits that have come up. Now, with ADA compliance, it's important to realize that because there's no set rules in place, right now with the law that are very clear, they're very vague, there are no businesses out there that can guarantee that they can make you 100% compliant with the ADA. And there's no certifications that make your website fully ADA compliant. Even if your e-commerce platform abides by those guidelines as best as possible, and even if your website abides by the guidelines as best as possible as well, they can still simply get you close, and you can hope that you don't get involved in a lawsuit despite your best efforts. So that's just something that you want to have full disclosure on. No company out there can really give you certification for it. Now, having said that, we mentioned those guidelines, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines earlier. And these guidelines, they're recorded in two article levels, 2.0 and 2.1. Well, what's the difference? 2.0 and 2.1 are very similar with some important differences. Let's look at 2.0 first. And when you look at how the guidelines have been written, ironically, in our context, they work out to be an acronym that we can easily remember. POUR, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Those are the categories that they break down the guidelines, is how they break it down. So let's see how each one entails. Let's look at perceivable first. So we're breaking it down to try and eliminate all the confusing jargon that we don't really want to look at. So here's the breakdown of the compliance guidelines. Provide text alternatives for any non-text content so that it can be changed into other forms that people need. So if it's an image, have some alternative text, such as large print, support for Braille when it has alternative text, speech, where if they are blind, they can hear what the alternative text says, maybe some other symbols or simpler language. Provide alternatives for time-based media. Create content that can be presented in different ways. For example, use a simpler layout without losing information or structure. And make it easier for users to see and hear content, including separating foreground information or separate it from the background. Now, let's look at the next category of operable. Make all functionality available from a keyboard. So is it really impossible to access parts of the site with just use of a keyboard on your website? Provide the users enough time to read and use the content. So if you have a scroll or a slider that's moving by way too quickly and their screen readers can't detect it, that might be an issue. You might need to have slower slides on your galleries. Don't design content in a way that's known to cause seizures. So any kind of flashing lights or any kind of flashing graphics, that could cause some seizures and some issues. Provide ways to help users navigate, find content to determine where they are. So that's a breakdown of operable. And again, you can tell these are somewhat vague, so it makes it really challenging to make it super effective. Understandable. Make text content readable and understandable. If you're using really complicated legal script, it needs to be understandable to pretty much everybody. Make web pages appear and operate in predictable ways, so improving the user interface on the navigation of your site. And help users avoid and correct mistakes. So again, you might think at first, how do I do this on a website? And that's why there's a lot of different ADA services out there. Right, now the last one, robust. To make your website robust, maximize the compatibility with current and future user agents, including assistive technologies. So moving forward, making it easier for your software to operate moving forward is really what it's looking at here. Now, there are only a few differences between 2.0 and 2.1, and these additional requirements are both changes in the operable section. In the O section. So here we can see it's the first change. 2.1 requires you to ensure that not just seizures are avoided, but any kind of physical reaction. So there are sometimes physical reactions that we may not naturally foresee that could happen. Maybe something on our website gives someone a headache or any other kind of physical reaction. Again, it's pretty vague, but it requires a lot of additional work to cover such a vast array of potential reactions. 2.1 also adds a whole new requirement to the operable section. They add a section that says to make it easier to use inputs other than a keyboard. So this means that they have to use special hardware, such as a Braille reader or other kinds of devices like a screen reader. The accessibility needs to be enhanced over the entire website. So it's a lot of work, two small changes, but it's a lot more work to ensure that the 2.1 requirements, which is basically an updated list of requirements, it's really the gold standard to follow, 2.1, that you should be following it. So there are some ways to be ADA compliant, but you might wonder, why at all should my website be ADA compliant? Is it something I should be concerned about? Well, you show that your business has a heart by being accommodating to those with auditory, visual, or physical disabilities. Having an accessible site means that your website will also have good SEO. And last but not least, avoiding lawsuits. If you're abiding by the guidelines as best as possible, that means that you'll be less likely to encounter lawsuits because you're abiding by the law. Now, over the past few years, there have been steady increases to lawsuits over ADA compliance failures. And it's our goal to help you build better sites with these guidelines. And together, we hope to lower that number. Now, how can we make our website ADA compliant? Well, we can see that it's important to do so because the average increase of lawsuits over year has been 23.5%. So how can we do this? 3 steps: audit, adjust, and have awareness. So with the audit concept, what you'll do is we'll perform an ADA audit for you. You could do some of this work by yourself, but it is quite a time-consuming process. Better handled by someone who doesn't have, who does it all the time and doesn't have a winery to manage, a vineyard to manage, and can also understand where you're vulnerable and can effectively help you fix it. Adjust. Be best to hire someone. You could do some of these changes yourself, but again, finding what's wrong and where it's wrong can be a very time-consuming process. And then thirdly, awareness. Being aware of keeping your ADA compliance regular. It would be a good idea to regularly get a tune-up since websites change all the time. Every time you add a new blog post or a new picture, you risk being not ADA compliant if you follow all the various steps needed. There are many companies out there that offer ADA compliance now, and in the light of recent news reports and many lawsuits, it's becoming a growing concern among the entire industry. We want to help. We've made a couple options for you depending on what concerns you the most. We have a package that focuses on the 2.0 compliance guidelines and a separate one for the 2.1 guidelines. And with this package, we'll audit and fix any issues that we can to bring you as ADA compliant as humanly possible with the guidelines that have been provided. We also have an ADA compliance tune-up option available, so that would tune up your site. Any additional ADA compliance that you need, we would provide this for you. So it's recommended after you do the initial ADA compliance, you do a checkup every 6 months or so for a tune-up. Now, alternatively, instead of doing a tune-up, once you've already gotten the main ADA compliance check done and you've gotten all your issues initially fixed, you can also decide to do a monthly checkup on ADA instead. Now, you might be wondering, what does the pricing look like? Well, for 2.0, you'll have a $1,500 fee for all the work that we do. 2.1, like I said, is a lot more work, and that's billed at $2,000. So that's a one-time fee. A tune-up every 6 months or so, if that was the direction you wanted to go, that would cost a single $500 fee. But then we have this handy little monthly service to keep your site regularly up to date with SEO and ADA compliance. And that would be just $29.99 a month. Now, what have we learned today? Well, sadly, like we said, there's no specific laws, just guidelines. So there's no guarantees that anyone can give you that you will be 100% certified ADA compliant. There is just no certification right now to being ADA compliant. And we also learned that no company out there can guarantee that you won't be sued. There's no liability for that. It's a constant thing. Every time you post a blog or an update or change a product, add a product, there is a risk that it won't be ADA compliant. So it's less expensive to get the ADA compliance package than to deal with lawsuits and lawyer fees, and it's much less of a headache to have that, perhaps even the monthly maintenance done on your site. Now, we've done many ADA compliance checks. We're well experienced with ensuring that your site is as close to ADA compliant as possible. Feel free to call us, email us, or simply purchase a package from our site. We'll reach out to you very shortly after to arrange a time to begin that work. So now we can open it up to your questions. It's not one of those things that's technical where, how do I do this or how does this work? It's pretty straightforward where we kind of have gone over a lot of the different things that we'll provide you in that session. Now, another question that we received in the chat window was, will the PowerPoint be emailed to us? You can get a replay recording of this webinar, which will be sent to you anywhere between 2 hours and 24 hours after this webinar completes. So you'll be able to shortly, very soon, have a version of this software available, or a version of this webinar available rather, and you'll be able to review this further. Now, again, if there's any other questions on ADA, feel free to submit them to us. Again, it doesn't really lend itself to having a ton of questions made, but what we'll do is we'll just post a couple of little offers here for you in the chat window so you can see if those are a few things that you're looking to display. So if you want to have a monthly $29.99 a month option, you can take a look at that right here and now. It's very easy to access it on our site, like we said, widgets.wineglassmarketing.com. That's totally up to you if you want to take a look at that. We also have the ADA compliance package that you could feel free to take a look at as well, if that's something that you're interested in. A lot of wineries out there are really concerned about this, and we want to help you avoid any kind of legal issues. Nobody wants to go to the courts. All right, everyone. Well, thank you. It was a nice, short, and sweet webinar. We appreciate all the time that you took with us this morning. Until the next time, I'm Dan Pendergast, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.